Trump has written out a 28-point plan to bring the conflict between Russia and Ukraine to an end. I'm going to argue here that everything that he has written out in this pointed list is exactly what Russia was asking for. And the Europeans who will scream and shout and say that Trump and America have lost their high horse morally by succumbing to Russia are number one, naive, number two, fools, and number three, not seeing the justice in this plan based on what Russia was asking for and why they were asking for it. What Russia was asking for was that the Donbass and a lot of the places in the eastern part of Ukraine should be free of Ukraine. And thereby, since they will be free of Ukraine, and they've already aligned themselves with Russia, they should become part of the Mother Russia Federation. That's what he's asking for. Second of all, he was asking for the denazification and the demilitarization of Ukraine. I'm not sure if this 28 plan covers the denazification, but the Nazis rule Western Ukraine and have been fighting against the Russian speaking Ukrainians since 2014 when there was an illegal coup, which overthrew a Russian-speaking president who was from that part of the country. I'm getting off track here, but the denazification really is to stop the Banderite population in Ukraine, which has been performing ethnic cleansing and maybe even genocide on Russian-speaking Ukrainians who helped vote in a Russian-speaking president of Ukraine. We have to remember Ukraine is a multi lingual and a multicultural country. And all of this started because Biden and Obama decided to overthrow the government because they wanted resources from Ukraine. And the president of Ukraine, who was Russian speaking, he's a Ukrainian, but he's Russian speaking, wasn't going to go with the EU, was going to go with Russia because they gave them more favorable terms. And why wouldn't they? Because Russians and Ukrainians are cousins, if not brothers. So what Russia wanted, like I said, was the denazification of Ukraine. Basically, that meant whatever force is driving the ethnic cleansing in that country against Russian speaking people has to go. Then the demilitarization, because Biden and Obama had it in their plans, and Angela Merkel, to make the Ukraine another step with NATO to threaten the existence of Russia with the threat of putting nuclear arms there and of also putting military bases and encircling Russia. So what we're seeing now is that the main thing that Putin wanted, he didn't want Kiev. He doesn't want to take all of Ukraine. He just wants that threat to not be on the steps of Russia. This would be tantamount to Russia putting nuclear weapons and making military agreements with Mexico and Canada. The US would not agree with that. So I'm going to go back to what I said before. This 28-point plan by Trump is giving Putin what he wanted in the first place to make the Ukraine no longer be an existential threat to Russia. Because what's in that plan is that there will be demilitarized zones. Ukraine's army would be reduced to only 60,000, and they couldn't have any foreign troops from NATO on that land. And I think Putin has every right to demand that because when Russia and Gorbachev signed the agreement with Russia to end hostilities, they said that NATO would not expand an iota. They've expanded beyond. They've now even turned the so-called peaceful Scandinavians, Sweden and Finland, and expanded them. And Russia's not aggressing on that. Finland is now part of NATO, and Finland is right there by Russia. But Russia will be fucking goddamned if they were going to allow it to extend to Ukraine, which is so intimately connected to Russia and has the ability, if the UN, I'm not the UN, if NATO puts military bases there and weapons to continue to choke Russia, which is what America wants to do. So this plan that Trump has said brought forth says that Ukraine will be demilitarized. They'll have 60,000 troops, and that's it. No American troops on the land. And furthermore, the part that was part of Ukraine before, the Donbass, the eastern part, belongs to Russia. You're not getting it back. You will not get that back. And you don't deserve to get it back. And here's the reason why. The Donbass and the eastern part of Ukraine is Russian speaking, and it has a high population. And in the elections in before 2014, they were able to use their influence to vote in democratically a Russian speaking president for Ukraine. He, Now, the Ukrainians in the West, through the Maidan Revolution, funded by Trump, not by Trump, by Vice President Biden, who also has energy shares in the Ukraine with his son. I guess when he died from his cancer, his son will take over that. And Obama and Victoria Nuland, who was their ambassador, brought about a revolution and a coup, which is a subjugation of democracy, because the president of Ukraine, who's Russian speaking, had to step down. And after that started, there started being ethnic cleansing and genocide from the western part of the Ukraine, which is not Russian speaking, upon the Russian speaking people of the Ukraine and the Donbass, who are connected closely, bordering with Russia, and Russia sees them as brothers and sisters. Okay. Russia then proceeded to take Crimea after that happened in 2014 or 2015 or whatever, in response to the ethnic cleansing of Russian speaking people by an undemocratic uh, overthrow of the government. But they came to an agreement. I forgot the name of the agreement because I've had some whiskey here. I think I can't remember the agreement, but there was an agreement between Russia and NATO and Ukraine that the hostilities between the western part of the country and the Russian speaking of the country, part of the country, would end. And Angela Merkel was there. This was just a ruse by the West and Angela Merkel and the EU to continue building and restart the violence. And they did. More than 14,000 Russian speaking Ukrainians have been killed in the last 10 to 11 years since before the agreement, the treaty, and then after they broke it. After they broke it, this retreat and continued. Russia still stayed calm. But when Biden started talking about putting missiles into Ukraine and pointing them at Russia, Russia gave a very clear warning to the Ukraine and said that if this continues, we will go to war with you. And because it's an existential problem for us. It's the Minsk Agreement, the Minsk Treaty. And the Minsk Treaty was the treaty where Ukraine and the U.S. and everybody agreed that they would stop the aggression with the Donbass and they would let things be. But they continued with that and thereby gave Russia an excuse, whether it's justified or not, to come in at the behest of the Donbass, who voted that they wanted Russia to come in and to begin aggression on Ukraine to liberate the Donbass. I'm not going to get into whether that's justified or not, but what I'm saying is that Russia's plan is only to take the Donbass and the eastern part of Ukraine and to continue holding Crimea and let the rest of Ukraine be with the West. They're only liberating the part of the country which is Russian speaking. And I think they are justified in doing that because that part of the country was disenfranchised when Ukraine had an overthrow of the Russian speaking president and his government, which represents all of Ukraine. So what I'm saying is Ukraine is an illegitimate country because it had a coup when they had a Russian speaking president. And now the US and the rest of the West are like, oh, you're attacking a sovereign country. It's not a sovereign country because it is subjugating the values of the Russian speaking people who actually voted in a Russian speaking president who forces from the western part of Ukraine, with the help of America, helped overthrow. And the reason they're doing that is because the Donbass has minerals, and the western part of the country wants to control those minerals and sell them off to EU and America. That's what this war is all about. It's about minerals. Going back to what I was saying before, Russia has always said that all it wants is the Donbass, and all it wants is for the Ukraine to be neutered, castrated, so that it's no longer a military threat to Russia. And that is what Trump's bill is offering. He can try to pretend like it isn't, but we know that's what it's offering because he said that the military will be limited to only 60,000 troops. He said there will be a demilitarized zone, and he said that Russia will get to keep the Donbass. That's all he's doing. So basically, what he's doing is he's setting up the surrender of Ukraine because Ukraine is saying they will fight. They'll snatch old men with one leg. They'll set transvestite women who call themselves men to fight. They'll take 12-year-old boys, probably 8-year-old boys, to continually dying to try to hold on to a part of the country which they have no right to. They have no right to the Russian speaking part of the country because they proceeded to do ethnic cleansing on them actually after they did a coup, which is undemocratic, to override their mandate for a Russian speaking president. And I'm going to say this finally: in the West and in Ukraine and in the world, this this Russophobia in which anything that's Russian is evil has to stop because there was a Russian speaking president who was voted in by the Ukraine. But I guess because he's Russian, democracy can't even save him, even though the fact that the Ukrainian people voted him in. Now, the Europeans are crying that if Trump pushes this through, this is him not defending poor Ukraine. I'm not buying that. Ukraine had a Russian speaking president and decided to throw him out and started killing the Russian speaking people in the country. Then they decided to have the stupidity to say, yeah, we'll put missiles on our country and aim them at Russia and we'll aggress Russia on your behalf. So they've lost their rights to be considered a sovereign nation. The next question is, why is Europe fighting for this? The European people aren't fighting for this because they're being hurt economically by this war because it's American and also European money that's paying for this war, which doesn't have any strategic value for European people. They will say that Russia will attack Ukraine and take over Ukraine and then take over Europe. Never. Russia has never aggressed Western Europe. They've aggressed Poland and Romania and areas in Eastern Europe, but they can't do that anymore. That's when they were the Soviet Union, when they had Ukraine and everything else. But Russia has never aggressed America, has never aggressed England, has never aggressed France, has never aggressed all of those countries in that region, has never aggressed Germany, even though Germany played a part in killing 26 million Russians. They've never aggressed them. So for Europe to say that letting Russia take the Donbass is setting themselves up to take the rest of Europe, no. Russia couldn't even take all of Ukraine. Russia is grinding out a victory just to take the eastern part of the country, and they've suffered hard for it. They've lost probably more than 100,000 troops to do it. All they're asking for is the Donbass. So these European leaders that are screaming foul, and the stupid European citizens who are screaming foul and don't realize that you can't alienate Russia because they give you cheap gas, are just fools. They're just fools. The leaders of the EU and the European peoples, their leaders are part of a corporate system linked to America that wants to profit off of continual wars and wants to destabilize Russia so they can control their resources, but it won't help the European people. It'll hurt von der Leyen. It will hurt Macron. It will help Starmer from Britain. Those guys, because they're part of corporate powers that profit off of energy and would make money off of war and also holding on to Ukraine's eastern part of Ukraine's resources. So that's what it's all about. One last thing: the U.S. and Europe seized. I don't know the amount of money. It's either $1 or $100 billion of Russian assets in U.S. dollars. And on this 28-point plan that Trump has proposed, Russia would get to keep the Donbass, would get to castrate Ukraine's dick so they no longer have a military, but they would have to use that seized money to pay for the rebuilding of the Ukraine. And I think Putin would agree. They're shaking Putin down. They're like, you ain't going to win all the way. You're going to still give us that money. And this is what this whole Ukraine versus Russia war has been about. It's been about money, money about weapon sales, Half of those money and weapon sales that went to the Ukraine weren't used for the military. 70% of them were diverted into Zelensky's pockets and other people and rerouted to Congress and Senate in America. I have to give Trump credit. I don't like Trump. He's a very bad person, but I have to give him credit. Not under his watch will this money scam continue. Trump wants a win. He wants to end this war, and thereby he's going to give Russia what it wants, the Donbass. And Russia will also give him 100 billion or 1 billion or whatever it is for the restructuring of Ukraine, which is going into the pockets of white people in America and in Europe, because they will rebuild the Ukraine and they will the infrastructure in the western part of the country, which has been devastated by this war. And Ukraine, the western part of Ukraine, will be America and EU's motherfucking bitch. You've been watching Political Animals, and you're getting schooled on what's going on in the world. Like, share, subscribe, and attack me if you don't agree with what I'm saying, or tell me you're saying the fucking truth. All I'm saying is what is the truth. People in Russia know this is the truth. People in Hungary know this is the truth. People in Spain know this is the truth. People in Iran, people in Venezuela, we know this is the truth. That the eastern part of the Ukraine, which is Russian speaking, is no longer part of the Ukraine. And it is just that it is happening. Thank you very much.